Hello, this is Professor Anirban Adia. I'm an associate professor of architecture at Lawrence Tech.
And I'm Luke Blair. I am a graduate research assistant at Lawrence Tech studying architecture.
So Luke and I worked on a research project supported by the College of Architecture and Design and Lawrence Tech. We wanted to investigate the relationship of cities and urban design to infrastructure development and their future for our cities. Cities have always been considered as one of the finest human projects. And as a project, it has oftentimes cities have responded to crisis. And as we see today, as we are going through a pandemic, diseases have always been a crisis that cities had to respond to, whether cholera in London, yellow fever in New York City, or recent H1N1 or the COVID-19, cities had to respond to these diseases for survival, for resilience. And urban infrastructure has always been an undercurrent, oftentimes ignored aspect of urban projects that have seen huge and monumental development and investments. So we specifically looked into this through a case study of cholera in London and the urban response to that, and we developed a timeline.
Right, so the timeline looks at a period from 1840 to 1890, sort of a critical time where cholera had multiple outbreaks and the city's response can also be mapped. And so beginning before the timeline's scope, you can see a map that starts to visualize the rivers and hidden rivers that exist in London. So sort of an idea of what London might have looked like before there was a large city there, and these rivers' relationship to the future sewer system that Joseph Bazalgette would build. You can also see two sections through this landscape, so you can begin to understand the elevation that London deals with, and the eventual sewer system we built is also mapped onto those sections, so you can see the lower, middle, and upper outfalls. Also here is beginning to get the idea of the cholera outbreaks that occur, and so this red line is showing amount of deaths occurring in London, and you can start to see these peaks that happen in 1849 and 1847. When there were two large cholera outbreaks, and then the associated temperature is below that in magenta. And these outbreaks spurred a response, one of these being John Snow, who famously mapped cholera deaths in Soho, and he began to gain a scientific understanding of how the disease worked, that it was a waterborne disease. Within this time, the sewer system was actually built. And so in 1858, there was the Great Stink, which the Thames and how polluted it was. And actually this stench and the associated hygiene issues is what spurred the sewer system to be built, rather than a direct scientific understanding of the waterborne nature of cholera. So once Bazalgette's sewer system was completed, the sewage was not treated at all until about a decade after that. Waste began to be treated at these outfall locations. And of course, today, there's also issues with pollution because the original sewer system, and up until today, is a combined sewer system, which takes stormwater and sewage together. And so when there are days of heavy rainfall, the system overflows, and there is sewage that is untreated that goes into the Thames. And so there is a current project dubbed the super sewer, which essentially follows the Thames. And rather than overflowing into the Thames, it overflows into this new super sewer, so that there is less pollution being done. So you could say that London has doubled down on the centralized solution and is making another large investment similar to when they did in the 1850s to upgrade their sewer system.
And we see in that graph that infrastructure development really is at that pivotal point when we were shifting from that primitive medieval knowledge towards really bringing in new Renaissance science and public health and urban planning and design. But back to the question of centralization and decentralization, I think there is need for hybridization. And how much ever large central systems we create, it's bound to fail. There will be pressures where it's going to break down. And that's where we need to plug in strategically with local site-based decentralized system, maybe plugging in with organic and natural systems and kind of using the two sides of the spectrum that London dealt with. And we hope that future projects in architecture, urban design, urban planning could look into that decentralization and approach along with large scale top down central efforts.